Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, September 11th, 2025. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this September 11th, 24 years since the terror attacks of 2001.
Moshe, incredible. It's been 24 years. A tough day in my house. I've mentioned on this podcast in previous years, my husband's best friend, Brooke Alexandra Jackman, she was killed that day along with about 3,000 other people. She was working in one of the towers in Manhattan. My daughter, Alex, named partly after her. So like I said, just a rough day here. But I do want to mention my daughter's elementary school this year has Patriots Day. We just moved to a new school district. So this is the first time that she's done this. And they learn about 9/11, and the school district sent out some resources for parents to be able to talk to their kids about it, because you now have people in their 20s who weren't alive during September 11th.
Yeah, or people who were very young. It is interesting, Jill, as you know, both of us were in college during that time. It sort of feels like I remember entering the workforce in newsrooms and asking folks, you know, what was like the end of the Cold War like, or what was the Nixon resignation like? And it sort of feels that way. And so that's why, you know, it's so important that we continue to learn about what took place that day. There will be commemorations today in New York and Pennsylvania and at the Pentagon in DC, the cities where the attack took place, but of course had a national, international impact, shaped a generation, shaped our foreign policy, shaped our domestic policy. And we'll discuss it a little bit on this day in history at the end of the pod.
Now to the headlines, starting with a tragic case of political violence in this country. Conservative Charlie Kirk shot and killed at a Utah campus event. What we know about the shooting and Kirk's legacy.
Jill, just shocking events yesterday, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, speaks to where we are as a country right now. And we'll get into what we know just hours after the assassination took place.
Overseas, a potentially major escalation involving Russia's war in Ukraine. Poland downs drones in its airspace, becoming the first NATO member to fire during this war. Poland, of course, borders Ukraine.
We're getting denials from the Russians that they were intending anything here, but it has a lot of NATO countries on high alert and very skeptical about what Russia plans next.
And to that horrific stabbing of the Ukrainian woman on a Charlotte train, the suspect now facing federal charges. We'll tell you why and what that means. FBI leaders filing suit saying that they were unlawfully fired because of their politics. And sticking with politics, the first excerpt is out from Kamala Harris's new book, What She Says About Joe Biden's Reelection.
Jill, what she has to say in this first excerpt, definitely surprising for those of us who were expecting a potential snoozer of a book here. She goes into 4 years in the Biden administration, her frustrations, and her biggest regret from 2024.
In business news, a new richest man on earth.
And Jill, this individual gained about $100 billion in value in just a few hours. We've never seen that in world history, we believe. We'll tell you who just took over the world's richest person list, surpassing Elon Musk.
And in some entertainment news, Ryan Seacrest revealing a Wheel of Fortune secret that apparently even Vanna White didn't know.
No, and she's been with the show for 40 plus years.
Something that he pointed out when she was like, wait, I didn't know that. And Moshe has on this day in history. Okay, starting with that political violence and fatal shooting of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk on Wednesday. Kirk was shot and killed during a large outdoor event at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah on Wednesday. He was just 31 years old. This event was part of his company Turning Point USA's Q&A format, where audience members could ask Kirk anything. President Trump announced his death on Truth Social, saying, quote, "The great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me. And now he is no longer with us. Melania and my sympathies go out to his beautiful wife, Erica, and family. Charlie, we love you." And then later on Wednesday night, he released about a 4-minute video statement from the White House.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity.
As of this recording, late Wednesday night, a suspect is still on the loose. Earlier on Wednesday, FBI Director Kash Patel wrote on X, quote, "The subject for the horrific shooting today that took the life of Charlie Kirk is now in custody." And then he thanked local and state law enforcement for working with the FBI. And then a few hours later, he wrote that the subject in custody has been released after an interrogation and that the investigation continues. At a press conference, police said that they believe the shooter fired from the rooftop of a nearby building and that the shooter was wearing dark clothing. Immediately after the shooting on Wednesday afternoon, video began circulating online. So you could see Kirk speaking to a crowd of about 2,000 people. He was sitting under an awning on stage. In case you're unfamiliar with Charlie Kirk, he would often visit college campuses and he would debate and engage in discussions with students, which is what this event was all about. So you could hear in that video one shot, and then Kirk, you could see, was struck in the neck. And he was remembered on Wednesday by people across the political spectrum who looked back at the impact that he had, particularly on young people in this country. Here is a friend of Kirk's, political journalist Charlie Hurt.
He was like 18 when he started to recognize the importance of actually reaching those students who were like, you know, who had been sort of shunted to the side in this indoctrination effort. And he talked to them in a very mature way. I would say that there's probably no person outside of President Trump himself who was more important at helping President Trump reach those people he needed to win re-election.
The governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, speaking at a press conference with law enforcement later Wednesday, echoing that sentiment and vowing to find the shooter.
This is a political assassination. Charlie believed in the power of free speech and debate to shape ideas and to persuade people.
Joe, we heard a lot of that from folks across the conservative spectrum, just the influence that Charlie had here. And what's remarkable is that he dropped out of college at 18 years old, unhappy with the education he said he was getting at the university level, and would go on to found Turning Point USA, which is an organization that has become huge in recent years. They have these huge conventions. They now count several 100,000 college students among their members. The goal is to spread conservative ideas to students on campus. As you mentioned, he was just 31 years old, married with two very young children, had millions of followers on social media as a friend and ally of President Trump. They would have a lot of conversations. Apparently, Trump considered him to be like family. I mean, the president here was the one who announced his passing yesterday. It's one reason he announced it. A number of folks at the White House in mourning here. He was very close to a lot of folks over there. He had his finger on the pulse of the conservative base in a way that really no one outside of President Trump, and even at times President Trump, didn't have, regardless of the issue that we're talking about. And he was extremely influential here. He would do these campus events. The event yesterday, he had just begun the event, had just taken a couple questions when he was shot. He would do events on college campuses, on high schools. You often may have seen the viral moments on social media. He would videotape all those conversations, and he would engage in people who very much disagreed with him, at times engaging in full-on verbal battles. But that was one of Kirk's goals. You know, listen, he was a very conservative guy, was a very religious guy, and had his views, but he believed in engaging with the full political spectrum out there. So he would do these events across the country, including, of course, yesterday, faithfully at Utah Valley University. Not surprisingly, the reaction on social media and in the media yesterday, Jill, really ran the gamut. People mourning him, but then also, sadly, just showing where we are as a country, people celebrating his death. And that's sort of where we've gotten here. It was notable yesterday that you did see a lot of prominent Democrats speak out immediately and condemn the shooting. That's everyone from Gavin Newsom, who incidentally did an interview with Charlie Kirk recently for his podcast, but also, you know, a whole bunch of Democratic governors, Josh Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, Josh Stein. You had Kamala Harris, the former vice president, also condemn the shooting, definitely speaking out, as you saw sort of folks on the far left, again, at times on social media, sadly celebrating this. At the same time, you had people mourning and paying tribute to Charlie Kirk on the right. But then you also had people like Elon Musk yesterday tweeting simply, The left is the party of murder, was one of the tweets from Elon Musk yesterday. So you saw that back and forth get very ugly online, Jill, and sadly that included our own social media page where I was trying to police some of the comments. Oftentimes it just becomes unmanageable, folks with more than 500,000 followers on Instagram. We don't have the capacity to go through those comments. If something is particularly disgusting and you flag it, we make a point of blocking those people. Though sadly yesterday, there were people who were very blasé and beyond blasé celebratory about what took place. And I was very clear that that does not have a place on our platform. And we ended up having to block a whole bunch of people yesterday on the Mo News Instagram account. Because again, regardless of how you feel in this country, we need to be a place where we believe in free speech and you have a right to say things that are controversial and defend your opinions without fear of having to be shot on a college campus and killed.
And not only that, his brand, as you mentioned, Moshe, was about engaging in discussions, in having debate, in listening to the other side. And that's how we move forward as a country, listening to people who you disagree with. Perhaps your opinion will change. Perhaps you can change their opinion. And if your opinion isn't changed, all right, well, you engaged in a conversation and maybe you just don't hate that person anymore. And you could just relate to them and see them as human. And that is really sorely missing in this current political climate.
Yeah, where you hate the other person because of their views, even though they're a human and they're entitled to those views. We often see it with people who are like, I can't follow you anymore. I believe you've become too conservative or too liberal. And I'm like, well, isn't that sort of the point? Even if you believe those things on the right and the left, and we get that from both sides all the time, shouldn't you be exposed to those views? Shouldn't you, develop an understanding for those views? But that's sort of where we've gone. So even if you vehemently disagreed with everything Charlie Kirk had to say, ultimately, I don't want to live in a country where it's okay to kill people for their positions. Jill, we live in a country that does have a history of political violence, right? If you go back through our history, we've had 47 presidents, right? 4 of them have been killed by gunfire in office, among them Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. We've had 6 other presidents who were shot at or wounded. So 10 of our presidents, almost, just over 20% of our presidents have either been shot at or killed during their time in office. And then, of course, you go back to the 1960s with the assassinations beyond JFK, but of RFK, of MLK, of Malcolm X. And sadly, it feels these days that we have now gotten 50, almost 60 years later, back to the 1960s. The nature of the divisiveness in this country, the nature of the political dialogue going to violence in this country, it very much feels in recent years like we're in the 1960s again. And if you just look back at the past couple of years, Jill, and this is just top of mind here, I was just thinking about some of the political violence that we've had to cover on this podcast in just the past 2 years. You had that assassination attempt on Nancy Pelosi. She didn't happen to be home, and the attacker instead assaulted her husband. And then you had, of course, last summer, 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. You had the firebombing of Governor Shapiro's home in Pennsylvania. Earlier this year, you had the shooting of 2 state Democrats in Minnesota, including the killing of one of them and their spouses. And now the assassination of a conservative movement leader in Charlie Kirk. And so we can add to that the threats against members of Congress. We can add to that the threats against the Supreme Court. The person with the weapon was found outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house, the Supreme Court justice. And then beyond politics, of course, we've gotten to the point where you had the Luigi Mangione killing of the insurance executive, which again was celebrated by certain elements of society. You had the man just several weeks ago who tried to kill NFL executives because of his beliefs. So whether it's politics, whether it's corporate, we have this sort of terrible combination, confluence of things happening in this country right now that has sort of gotten us to this point, right? We feel our politics are broken. It's almost views like nihilistic views, like nothing matters anymore. Everything is made worse and more extreme on social media as you're put in a cocoon, as you're put in a bubble. So social media meets our politics, meets the broken system in Washington, has people feeling like everything is useless, and a whole group of people who feel like, well, what's the point of the world anyway? And then we live in a country uniquely that has more guns than people. Okay, add that to the mix on top of a lack of mental health care in this country. And that is the recipe for where we have gotten now as a country, sadly. And so I don't want to live in this country, but sadly, Jill, I saw the headline yesterday and it made me so sad that I wasn't necessarily surprised that we've gotten to this point. That we've gotten to the point in this country where, we're engaging in another era of political assassination here. And I don't know what the solution is. And I don't know that there's a solution anytime in the short term. What needs to happen before there is some sort of cool down effect in this country?
Moshe, I think that's really well said. And you point to the 1960s saying we haven't seen anything like this current time since then. I think one of the things that's different and worse is the glee that we are seeing in reaction to some of these killings. There is not a national mourning period anymore if a prominent person is killed. It's almost, as you described with the comment section that we saw on some of these posts, almost like getting the man type of thing. And that's even more tragic about it. And to your point, I don't know how things change.
Well, it's poignant actually, Jill, that today is 9/11. Right? 24 years ago today, we suffered a tragedy that actually brought the country together. If you look at some of the polling numbers and the imagery of Democrats and Republicans holding hands and saying, we're in this together, because it was a foreign enemy. And, you think 24 years later, we wouldn't have the same reaction, right? We'd go straight to the blame game of who caused this. Was it red team or blue team that caused this? And sadly, 24 years later, regardless of the foreign enemies and adversaries that we face, the enemy is within, right? Our worst enemy is within these days. And so what you need really is like Donald Trump and top Democrats getting together and saying this needs to end. We cannot go further down this path. We don't want to see what that America looks like. And we don't want to hit a point of no return.
And now to a major international story that we are following, a major escalation in Russia's 3-year-plus war against Ukraine with new concerns that it might spread. Poland shot down suspected Russian drones in its airspace on Wednesday with the backing of aircraft from its NATO allies. It was the first time that a member of the NATO Western Military Alliance is known to have fired shots during Russia's war in Ukraine. Prime Minister Donald Tusk called the incident a large-scale provocation by Moscow. He said the first drone in Polish airspace was recorded around 11:30 p.m. Tuesday and was last detected around 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Tusk told Polish parliament it was, quote, the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II, though he also said that he had no reason to believe that they are on the brink of war. Poland formally invoked what's called Article 4 of the NATO treaty after detecting 19 Russian drones probing its airspace about 100 miles into Poland. So, Moshe, this wasn't right on the border. It shot down 4 of the drones. What it means that Poland invoked the NATO Article 4 is that it triggers crisis consultations with NATO's 32 members when another member is under threat. Since NATO's founding in 1949, Article 4 has only been invoked 7 times. So this means the group started to talk about a response. It is different from the famous Article 5. That comes after an official attack, when an attack on one ally is treated as an attack on all. Poland has yet to invoke that as of this recording. NATO leaders condemned the incursion as a deliberate test of the alliance's defenses, warning that it came just days before Russia and Belarus began joint military exercises near NATO's border, prompting Poland to close its border. Moshe, one of the reasons that Russia does not want Ukraine to join NATO is because Article 5.
Right. The fact that it's a, 30 plus country alliance. Incidentally, Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to 2 new NATO members, Sweden and Finland, who for years didn't join either alliance, either the Soviet alliance or the NATO alliance, but they became fearful in the last couple of years following what happened in Ukraine. Poland, for obvious reasons, given its history, given previous invasions and occupations by Russia through the centuries, has always been very concerned that they were next here following Ukraine. They sit there right there on the border with Belarus and with Ukraine. And incidentally, there's a small part of Russia that's sort of an exclave and an island of sorts called Kaliningrad that actually sits there on the Polish border. So it gives the Russians the ability to put troops there right on the Polish border. So they've always been very concerned about this. Now, Russia says, we had no intention. First of all, they denied that any drones came across the border. They accused the Poles of lying, that they haven't presented enough evidence. And then Belarus, which is a ally of Russia, basically admitted, yeah, the drones went across the border, but that's because the Ukrainians are jamming the GPS on the drone, so they didn't know where to go, which is why they came across the border. Now, the GPS jamming goes about 15 miles. The fact that some of these drones went 100 miles into Poland, it's very hard to claim that that was because of jamming. Again, it was over 7 hours and nearly 24 of these drones. The NATO Secretary General called this reckless. The U.S. ambassador to NATO said that the U.S. will defend every inch of NATO. Trump, incidentally, has been relatively quiet on this. He did post on Truth Social midday on Wednesday, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go!" Exclamation point. That was it. Typically, you would assume a president would say more, especially on camera, especially somebody like Trump, given that Russia is being increasingly assertive here. And while there's these Russian denials, a lot of military experts call what took place Tuesday into Wednesday gray zoning. Gray zoning is a military term which is essentially defined as coercive or subversive actions to gain intelligence, effectively checking out the enemy's defenses without going so aggressive as to create open warfare. So gray zoning is like, oh, some of these drones may have gone across the border, just to sort of gauge how you might respond to that. How do your fighter jets work? How quickly did you respond? So that's the idea here, despite the Kremlin denials, that this was an obvious attempt at gray zoning in Poland. So they're very concerned in Poland right now. They've been increasing their defense spending in recent years. A bunch of NATO jets were involved in the response here. And so we'll see what happens. Again, as I was taping, we haven't heard much from Trump, but we have increasingly heard of Trump who's very frustrated with Vladimir Putin of late, Jill. Here's a montage. Here's several clips you're about to listen to. And each of the statements are from various moments in June and July of Trump saying sort of the same thing over and over again about Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
I didn't like last night. I wasn't happy with it. Missiles were fired, and I was not happy with it. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, and I'm very disappointed. I was not happy with the conversation. I've been sort of letting people know I'm not happy about what's going on. I am very disappointed with President Putin. I'm not happy about it. And I'm not happy about anything having to do with that war. I'm not happy about anything about that war. Nothing. Not happy at all.
Again, that was a montage there of Trump in June, July, and August saying things like, I'm not happy, I'm disappointed, I'm not happy, I'm disappointed. And so ultimately, let's see, what this means and whether there's a real U.S. reaction beyond Trump expressing he's unhappy or disappointed here in Vladimir Putin.
Moshe, listening to that compilation, it almost sounds like Trump is like an angry father. Like, don't make me come back there. I'm unhappy, I'm disappointed. But at what point does that translate into any type of action?
Right. The thing for Putin is like, there's no consequences for my actions. I'm 3.5 years into my war in Ukraine, and no one's here to stop me. And why don't I send some drones over Poland just, to mess a little bit and gather some intel and freak them out a little bit, show my authority as the great Russian bear, so to speak. And so, we're going to watch this. The Europeans are very concerned about this, and we'll. In particular, in the next few days, there's going to be this large military exercise happening between Belarus and Russia. What will that entail? Where will they go? It doesn't sound like they're trying to invade Poland, at least based on the way that Putin and Russia reacted yesterday. But certainly everyone, understandably, on high alert, given what has taken place.
Time for the speed read from the Charlotte Observer. The man who fatally stabbed a Ukrainian woman to death on Charlotte's light rail system late last month is now facing federal charges. It means he could now be eligible for the death penalty, according to the Justice Department. DeCarlos Brown Jr., who was arrested on August 22nd after he fatally stabbed 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska, was charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina with committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system Tuesday. Attorney General Pam Bondi explained why the Justice Department filed federal charges, telling Fox News that she feels that Charlotte's district attorney, Spencer Merriweather, quote, can't handle the case. Here Bondi is on Fox News.
We have taken the case because it's murder on mass transit. Progressive DAs cannot handle this case. The progressive DA in North Carolina in Charlotte, his name is Spencer Merriweather. He believed in letting him sign a written promise to appear. He participated in passing that, agreeing to let criminal defendants sign a written promise to appear in court. That's what he was allowed to do in July. Weeks later, he murdered Irina. Justice will be served.
Jill, this case has become a huge issue for the White House, for the Justice Department, and in particular, it's because the politics of this. They see this as an example of blue city policies that have allowed repeat criminals to roam the streets only to engage in worse crimes, right? That they've sort of let go of misdemeanors, and then these folks go ahead and commit felonies. In this case, murder, and go after, various democratic policies, social justice policies, as well as policies like cashless bail. Though it is notable that North Carolina is a state with a supermajority Republican legislature. So some of the policies here that they're going after are actually North Carolina state policies and not necessarily Charlotte city policies. Nonetheless, we are seeing a very aggressive stance here by the White House. Trump writing a Truth Social yesterday that Brown, the murderer in this case, should be, quote, awarded the death penalty. There can be no other option. Now, again, Brown faces the federal charge here, the crime of committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system. Allows them to pursue the case, and it does, again, carry the possibility of the death penalty, as the president is calling for here. Now, the mayor of Charlotte says the city is now increasing security on commuter trains effective immediately. The attack has sparked outrage. It comes after the Charlotte area transit system confirmed there was not security on board the train at the time. They patrol the system, they say, not stationed in one specific area. Now, the killer in this case has a criminal record, including larceny, breaking and entering, weapons charges. He served 5 years in prison for robbery with a dangerous weapon starting back in 2015, and they got out several years later. In total, 14 charges in the past, including an arrest in January, but he was still on the streets leading up to the attack here. Now, notably, after he was arrested in the fatal stabbing here, he was quickly sent to a state mental hospital for an evaluation. That is a sharp contrast from in January, when he was arrested for a misdemeanor. It took them 6 months for a court to order a mental evaluation for him. And that's one of the things that they're noting here, that he had cycled through the criminal justice system, that various times, various charges were dropped over the years. And Brown's mother apparently has told local media outlets that she sought an involuntary psychiatric commitment for him this year because he started to become violent at home in the last few months. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. But getting that involuntary commitment apparently very difficult in North Carolina and other states. A court has to find that they're a danger to themselves and others. And apparently that was too difficult to get in the state of North Carolina this year.
From Reuters, a lawsuit by 3 fired FBI officials lays out a disturbing account of efforts by top Trump aides to strip the Bureau of its independence. Former FBI acting director Brian Driscoll and 2 other former senior officials who were fired without cause last month filed suit against the Trump administration on Wednesday. They say that they were dismissed in a, quote, campaign of retribution that targeted officials who were viewed as insufficiently loyal. The lawsuit alleges that FBI Director Kash Patel said that he had been ordered to fire anyone who had worked on a criminal investigation against President Trump and that his own job depended on their removal. According to the lawsuit, Patel told Driscoll the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it. Steve Jensen, the former assistant director of the Washington field office, and Spencer Evans, who's the former top official in the Las Vegas field office, are also plaintiffs in the lawsuit. Driscoll temporarily served as the Bureau's director early this year. He is viewed as a hero by some people in the Bureau after he sought to shield them from being targeted by the Justice Department for their role in investigating people who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Moshe, needless to say, I would imagine that people who work in the FBI don't pick what cases they work on. They're assigned them.
They're assigned them, and they don't go through a political loyalty test, and that's what they're claiming they faced here, that they were being vetted ahead of Trump's inauguration earlier this year, and they were asked questions by White House staffers like, when did you start supporting President Trump? What Democrats have you voted for in recent elections? Apparently, at least one of them, Driscoll, said he refused to answer those questions, and then he was informed later that he failed the vetting interview. And someone said he was not based out enough, a term he understood to mean loyalty to Trump's ideology, the idea, the term, if you've heard, being based. Now, the lawsuit says Kash Patel, the new FBI director, acknowledged that firing FBI agents without cause would violate internal FBI rules and federal law. And apparently he knew he could be sued over this, but did it anyway out of loyalty to the president. That's been the big concern here with the bringing in of overt politics into the Pentagon, into the CIA, and in this case, the FBI. And so this is a case we're going to watch go through the court system here.
We're getting the first excerpt from Kamala Harris's new book from The Atlantic. Former VP Kamala Harris writes that letting former President Biden have the final choice of whether to run in the 2024 election was, quote, recklessness. The revelation comes in the first excerpt from her upcoming book, 107 Days, published in The Atlantic on Wednesday. The book excerpt marks the first time that Harris has publicly criticized Biden's choice to run for re-election. Harris writes that fellow Democrats on her team were, quote, hypnotized into giving Joe and Jill Biden the final say on whether to run, and prioritized an individual's ego and an individual's ambition. Harris said she felt pressured not to speak up about Biden running out of fear of seeming disloyal and having naked ambition.
So as these major politicians roll out books, they typically put out some of the buzziest anecdotes, stories, or chapters to start with, because they're trying to gin up pre-sales and ensure that it's a bestseller and starts to develop a lot of buzz, right? So they certainly got this started with a bang here with these revelations by Harris about her views on Biden. Now, interestingly, in this excerpt, she still defended Biden's mental fitness. She says that she would have spoken up if she believed that the 82-year-old, he was 82 at the time, was unfit for office. She says, as loyal as I am to President Biden, I'm more loyal to my country, but she did not believe that he was not up to the job, even though she regrets not having a more serious conversation with him. And again, the whole party effectively deferring to Jill and Joe Biden on all of this. Now, she does also have more negative things to say about Biden and his team in this excerpt, and we'll look forward to reading more in the book. She says that she was constantly undercut, that when she faced various attacks over the 4 years, that they didn't defend her, that they viewed that basically anything good for her was bad for Biden. And so ultimately, she does harbor a lot of resentment here about how she was treated during her time as vice president. Again, the book is called 107 Days, which marks how long she ran for president, the shortest presidential run in modern history. And she again says, when it comes to the mental competency thing, that Biden was just tired, Jill, that in Harris's viewpoint, he was not incapacitated and didn't lack the ability to continue to be president.
So most politicians tend to write these books as a way to cement their legacy. Harris is still relatively young when it comes to politics and certainly can have a next act. What do you make of the way that she phrased that and what this could potentially mean for the way that she's looking to be remembered?
Well, it's very interesting that, a year after basically everyone else said this, she's finally coming around in saying this. A lot of people, and we'll see how she addresses it in her book, said that one of her mistakes running for president, even though she was sort of behind the eight ball, and, it's hard to think of a scenario where she wins last fall, but, maybe giving her a running start would have been her separating herself from Joe Biden. And so she's finally doing that a year later, sort of, kind of, right? And being critical. Nothing altogether surprising here in terms of what's come out so far. It is notable that recently she passed on the chance to run for California governor, which basically would have been a lock for her because people around her said she just didn't want to do that job. She doesn't want to be the governor of California, even if she can win being governor of California. She very much wants to be president. And so she wants to run again. And so you're seeing this sort of separation, albeit later than nearly every other Democrat, from Kamala Harris. She's trying to show that she, remains loyal to Joe Biden. Of course, she would not have been vice president if he didn't choose her. So I think the jury's out right now. Jill, we'll see what's in the rest of the book here, how the interviews then subsequently go as part of this rollout, and we'll probably get a better sense of what comes next for her.
In business news from CNBC, Oracle shares surged more than 50% Wednesday after the tech giant reported a blowout quarter fueled by hundreds of billions of dollars in new AI-related business. Oracle's future bookings for its cloud business nearly tripled in 3 months to $455 billion in sales. CNBC host David Faber called the news shocking. The stock surge brought Oracle's market valuation to about $969 billion, nearly a $1 trillion company. The stock hit a record high, marking Oracle's biggest one-day gain since 1992.
Joel, if you look at the stock chart yesterday for Oracle, it looks like a meme stock, just explosive, something you rarely, if ever, see with sort of non-Bitcoin, non-crypto type investments, more traditional investments. And the rally here, remarkably, turns Larry Ellison into the world's richest person. Albeit briefly, we'll see how long it lasts here, but he was about 100 billion behind Elon Musk when the day started 2 days ago. And he has surged to be worth about $400 billion, the richest person on earth. has to do partially with the fact that Larry Ellison has about 1.1 billion shares of Oracle stock. So that does have a tendency to help you gain $100 billion in net worth individually in a single day, as this company became nearly worth $1 trillion. But it just speaks to the AI surge here. Oracle surprising everyone, these huge contracts that they're getting. Oracle already a massive company. Larry Ellison already didn't have to worry about ever checking his bank account ever again. But things got taken to a new level yesterday.
And finally, from ABC News, Wheel of Fortune host Ryan Seacrest revealed what makes that famous clicking noise on the wheel. And it surprised even Vanna White, who has been hosting the show for 4 decades. Seacrest telling Good Morning America the clicking sound is made by rubber bands. Here's a bit of this clip.
And the clicking sound, there are rubber bands like you used to have with orthodontia on your teeth.
Oh.
That's what makes the clicking.
The
the rubber bands are in there
that's
somewhere.
right. I can see it.
Yeah, right there.
Here.
Do you know I never knew that?
Well, welcome to season 43.
Yeah, you're gonna really.
So Vanna White has been co-hosting the show since 1983, when she started with Pat Sajak. This is, of course, only Seacrest's second year as host, but it appears he has some questions that Vanna hadn't asked here, or decided to, look under the wheel, so to speak, to find these rubber bands going. So, fun little secret there, fun fact for all of you who might watch Wheel of Fortune. Finally, we end with a bit of On This Day in History, remembering the September 11th terrorist attacks, the victims and the fallout here, Jill. 24 years ago today, 2,977 people were killed in the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. 4 planes were hijacked that morning. 2 intentionally crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, those Twin Towers collapsing shortly thereafter. 1 plane flew into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, and then another one that was believed to either be headed towards the White House or the U.S. Capitol that day crashes into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers on that plane became aware of what was going on. You used to, back in the day, 25 years ago, have these plane phones that were sort of where the TV screens are now, and passengers became aware of what was going on because they were in the air following what would happen at Ground Zero in New York, as well as the Pentagon. And so they would fight the terrorists, regain control of the cockpit. But sadly, that plane would end up crashing outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Americans remember watching this on television in those minutes, hours, and days following the attack. As there are every year, there will be remembrances across the country, including in New York at Ground Zero, Pennsylvania, as well as the Pentagon. That will begin at 8:30 this morning. Live coverage will be on those cable news networks, as well as probably your local networks as well. Right now, it appears President Trump will be at the ceremony at the Pentagon. He'll also be at the Yankees game tonight, where there will be a commemoration for 9/11. But in terms of the impact here, Jill, it's hard to overstate how much that changed American government, American society, our foreign policy, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the creation of the TSA, what we all experience going through airports all the time, the creation of the Patriot Act, expectations or the lack of expectations when it came to privacy. Then, of course, the wars in Afghanistan and subsequently in Iraq, which would cost the U.S. trillions of dollars, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of those injured. There still is an American military presence in Iraq to this day. The U.S., of course, infamously withdrew from Afghanistan a couple of years ago. And really, it was the reaction to all of this that then led subsequently to the U.S. sort of pullback in recent years, saying, what is this role we have in the world? And you've seen that reset play out in our politics. You've seen that reset play out with President Trump's election. And so whether it became foreign engagement, domestic policy, views on terrorism, travel, national security, political rhetoric, intelligence reforms, veterans issues, the CIA, just so much of what we've seen unfold domestically and globally over the course of the past now 2+ decades, we can point back to that day. And I think we both know where we were on that day, as many Americans remember what took place today.
And given that we're almost a quarter century already removed from the event, a reminder, talk to your kids about it. Talk to other people about it. It's important that we pass on the lessons of that event and just what happened to the next generation. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Those reviews really do matter.
All right, everyone. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
I can listen
Mau kita apa?